In this video, we will define conservation and explain what constitutes a natural resource. We will discuss the specific natural resources we use for agricultural production and why we must conserve them. We will then introduce various agricultural concepts and practices that help us conserve these resources. Conservation is defined as the act of conserving, prevention of injury, decay, waste, or loss, preservation. Official supervision of rivers, forests, and other natural resources in order to preserve and protect them through prudent management. Forests, wildlife, fossil fuels, minerals, and fisheries are all considered natural resources, but for our lesson we're concerned with water and soil. You may be curious why we should be concerned about the conservation of these resources. To explain briefly, America relies on healthy soil and water for both direct and indirect conservation of natural systems. Agriculture is an ideal example of a human activity that relies on conservation to sustain itself. Today, America is producing food to feed domestic and international populations, as well as supplying commodity crops for fibers and fuels. While there are many benefits to this production, it can also be incredibly damaging to our ecosystems if it is not done properly. For example, sediment, often from eroding fields, is the #1 polluter in American waterways according to the Environmental Protection Agency. It is important that we prevent damage to the natural resources used for agricultural production because healthy soils allow for forests and wildlife to prosper. Aerated soil allows for infiltration of water. This infiltration prevents erosion and sediment pollution in our water sources. These water sources can then be used for human activities and necessities such as drinking water, hydropower, and agriculture. Good water quality means less energy and chemicals are required to clean our drinking water. It also improves the productivity and health of aquatic ecosystems, including marine, lake, and pond habitats. This decreases risks to public health. Better water quality can even mean there are more spaces for aquatic recreation, like swimming, fishing, and boating. Unfortunately, farmers have not always reliably practiced conservation. In 1934, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas were hit with the biggest man-made disaster in U.S. history. Between the years of 1934 and 1937, drought in the region led to dry soil that was not able to retain any water, nutrients, or fertility. Repeated tillage of farmland, which is the act of turning up soil before planting crops, created land that was unable to handle such dry conditions. Dust storms surged throughout the region and reached as far east as New York City. In response to the devastation, President Roosevelt created the Soil Conservation Service. This agency's purpose was to offer technical support to landowners in order to maintain healthy soil, which would prevent catastrophes such as the Dust Bowl from decimating the farms and lands of future generations. Today, the conservation practices sustained by environmentalists at the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the Natural Resource Conservation Service support the development of healthy soils and projects that protect our water resources. But there is still a reason to worry. Natural resource problems can arise from site-specific erosion, improperly managed dams can degrade water quality, and the combination of drought and land mismanagement can still lead to conditions that make it impossible to grow. Soil is affected by farming in various ways. Perhaps the most concerning way soil is damaged in the agricultural process is through the repeated tillage it undergoes between growing seasons. When the soil is turned over, subsurface root systems are disturbed. This disruption kills the mycorrhizals, allows water content to evaporate, and depletes nutrients that have built up beneath the soil. We also harm our soil through the excessive use of fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, which ward off pests and weeds. These excessively applied chemicals then make their way to water sources. Excessive fertilizer leads to an abundance of nitrogen and phosphorus in aquatic ecosystems. This leads to algal blooms, the coverage of surface water with algae, which will deprive aquatic species of oxygen, diminish water quality, and prevent sunlight from reaching lower levels of the ecosystem. Sediment from erosion also enters the waterways, which will diminish water quality. This degradation of ecosystems and use of chemicals will eventually lead to a loss of wildlife. There are best management practices, or BMPs, that can be used to prevent these problems. Dry soil with low nutrients and little water holding capacity can be improved with the use of cover crops. Cover crops are the constant growth of a ground cover which supports microbial growth and soil aeration. It is usually applied just before or after harvesting when profitable crops are removed. Oftentimes, the area where cattle congregate to water is turned up and vulnerable to erosion. The construction of cement slab or rock-like perimeters around these areas, also known as heavy-use area pads, can prevent and decrease the amount of soil turned up and therefore decrease sediment erosion. Conventional irrigation can lead to massive amounts of wasted water and energy resources because the water will evaporate before it reaches the roots of the crops. The use of drip irrigation, which is tubing that gradually releases water at the base of the plant, is much more sustainable. It allows the water to infiltrate the soil before it can evaporate. The proximity of crops and animals to water bodies is often a cause of water pollution. Through the growth of riparian buffers, water runoff can be filtrated through these vegetated areas before it reaches the water body. These riparian buffers should be comprised of native vegetation and possibly plants preferred by pollinators. This will improve the quality of nearby crop production. These are all methods used by SWCD and NRCS employees to help landowners improve and maintain the quality of our natural resources. You now understand what constitutes a natural resource, why we should conserve them, and what it means to put conservation into practice. It is important that we understand what we can do to prevent damage and use our resources in a way that will maintain them for future generations.